So I had my first appointment with an osteopathic physician today. Oh, there's Newt. Wants me to play now, of course. Oh my goodness. Not right now, buddy. Not right now. Oh, this is ending up being quite the circus, I think is an appropriate word. He was amazing. And I think osteopathic treatments in general are amazing. And I have to thank my friend Jana, who clued me into this reality, this fact, somewhat recently, and inspired me to make such an appointment. And so the treatment was good, although it was short because being the first appointment, we had to speak a lot to get the background and so forth. Then he also gave me a whole bunch of links to videos, websites, people, books, and I've all but finished now a book called Breath by James Nestor. And that is the main one that I wanted to focus on sharing with you about today. I'm not going to go too into depth. I highly recommend the book. Please read it. There is an Audible version, which is why I have finished it already. I can generally get through those much more quickly than I can reading print. He shares all these things, not only about spiritual breathing practices, mantras, and the esoteric side of things, but also the scientific side of things. He does his own sort of experiments. He shares some experiments that have been done in the past. I have to admit, I skipped over the one that involved dogs because I couldn't handle listening to that, because some of these are very miserable. But he talks about the value of nasal breathing. Now, if you're like me, you may have several sensitivities, several reasons that sometimes breathing through your nose may not seem to be an option. However, I did come across something similar a few years ago and have been working on sort of off and on for that time, purposefully trying to breathe through my nose. And sure enough, the more you try, the more you practice, the more you are actually able to do it, the more you can build capacity in your nasal passages. There are a couple of pressure points. Be very gentle. I'm not a professional in terms of health and so forth, so try at your own risk. But there's a nice little point you can press here, just very gently, like I said, that helps clear the sinuses, as well as towards the back of the neck, very gently again. And, steam, tea sometimes helps me clear my sinuses. Walking helps, just a little bit of movement, even standing. And laying with my head on a small book also help. But part of the reason so many of us in today's world have a lower nasal capacity, he shares, is because we haven't all been breastfed. I wasn't. Sorry, I'm not blaming you, Mom. I know you did the best you could, if she even watches this, but I was not. And the sucking motion, specifically for those of us who are breastfed, helps to develop the palate so that it comes down a little bit more. Mine is a bit high, especially in back. And that's actually pressing up against my nasal cavity, my sinuses and so forth, and making me have less capacity there. However, you can begin, it's a little harder once you're an adult and older and so forth, but even then you can begin to practice that suction, that clicking noise you even heard me make, that kind of thing, as you're chewing, as you're eating, as you're drinking, and then just in your day-to-day life, you can suction your tongue as best you can to the roof of your mouth. That will begin to draw it down a little bit It will take times, definitely when you're an adult, but it will begin to increase that capacity. I actually think that I could feel more capacity even as I was doing it. It may not have stayed, but it felt like, at least temporarily, that I could feel it expanding a little bit. That tongue pressing up against the roof of your mouth and even engaging with a little bit of suction also helps to connect your third eye, heart, and throat chakras. And if you watched last week's video and the week before that, I've been speaking about the transits lately with Uranus and Pluto and Sun, Moon, of course, but also Mercury, Venus, and Mars, all going through this phase where they are defining the crown and third eye centers in human design and not connecting necessarily with defined channels to the throat and the heart and the rest of the body. And so we're getting a little bit of stuck energy. I'm not sure that one of those planets is there consciously at this very moment, but it's going to be for a few weeks in February, most of February, consciously, and unconsciously for a while after that still. So this motion really will help with that connection. So I wanted to share that since I've been speaking about it in my 2 last videos. The other thing I learned in this book, Breath, which I've also been working on quite a bit in previous years, especially having read Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. I've actually read it several times. He speaks about Kriya Yoga. Many of you may have already heard of Kriya Yoga. He doesn't fully give you instructions in Autobiography of a Yogi as to exactly what it is, but he does talk about the in-breath and the out-breath leading into each other, kind of like an ocean wave. You almost can't quite tell where one begins and one ends, that wave and then the receding. So not only have I been practicing that more, again, recently inspired by this book, but I have also been lengthening my breath. He talks about that in Autobiography of a Yogi as well. And you may have noticed when I've done my channeled messages, when I do my 3 breaths at the very beginning, I take pretty long breaths. I have pretty decent lung capacity even now, but I've been lengthening it even more so this week. And again, not going to get too detailed, but he talks about the value of carbon dioxide, which I know, like many of you, that blew my mind, you know. And the key is, he's not saying, no one is saying that we need less oxygen. But when we lengthen our breath, we actually do increase the carbon dioxide in our body, not stale, but fresh. I know that may sound like an oxymoron or a contradiction, but it's not. The key is to not hold your breath. He found through many studies that when you lengthen your breath, you increase the carbon dioxide without diminishing the oxygen. And that carbon dioxide actually helps get the oxygen to your cells. It acts as a carrier that way. And sure enough, I have noticed a lot of help doing that with my throat. I've been having some issues, as I shared with you in those previous videos, with my throat. So I did make some tea to have by me for this video, but I will now get into the channeled message from Gaia now that I've shared with you these updates and sort of rediscoveries for me anyway. I mostly had, heard about these things, but, I also had braces when I was a kid, and that actually made my mouth smaller, and many of you may have experienced that as well. It makes it where you almost don't feel like you have room for your tongue. If you're like me, maybe you bite your tongue fairly often, maybe even your cheeks. And this practice of putting the tongue against the roof of the mouth can also partly slowly help expand your mouth a little bit. And my teeth are actually a little bit crowded, even though I had braces. It has been quite a few years and I have not worn a retainer, but I am appreciating these practices to help myself with breathing, because even while sleeping, sometimes it has been a little bit of a struggle for me to find a good position for my tongue, to breathe freely. And this helps with snoring as well, for those of you who may experience that as well as apnea. All right, here we go. Message from Gaia. Hello, this is Gaia. We would like to thank Amy for sharing what she did, about what she has been rediscovering this week. A couple of additional tidbits along the lines of what she has been rediscovering as well are that, to the best of your ability, when you can put your tongue along the roof of your mouth, a little bit back from your teeth preferably, but not if that feels like it is constricting your airway. With that little bit of suction that Amy described, you are helping to activate your pineal gland, which some of you may know already, and releasing nitric oxide. We believe we have your name for that molecule correct. We know it is beneficial in many ways for your health. And while this may not instantly cure any of your particular health issues that you may have happening right now, it may help and it may prevent any issues from happening, other issues from happening, or issues from getting worse. Amy has noticed more of a feeling of peace with this breathing and with this practice. And while she did mention that she has been having issues with her throat, and you may have noticed her clearing her throat on previous videos, she has also been previously feeling some constriction there, possibly from her thyroid. It essentially doesn't really matter the reason. She was going to have it tested, and she still will. But whichever organs may have been involved in this feeling of constriction, the breathing has helped. And currently, right now, she is not feeling it. Many of you who have experienced apnea, experienced that feeling of constriction, experienced restriction in your respiratory tract anywhere, sinuses, lungs, etc., have probably noticed that with those issues, you also feel more anxious. They are not pleasant feelings. And sometimes in the winter, many of you where you are is in the northern hemisphere, and so it may be winter where you are. It becomes even more difficult because you are breathing less than fresh air indoors more often, and perhaps even bowing your head against the cold or wind that may occur outside. And so we encourage you to do whatever you need to do to help free that up. The breathing exercises that Amy has mentioned, without forcing anything. The focus should be on freeing it up, freeing yourself, freeing your body in every way. This could be dancing, walking, lying down, stretching, jumping, singing, chanting, humming. There are many different ways to do this, but we would encourage you to explore ways that do not involve too much time in front of a screen or even in front of a book or paper, simply because those methods typically have you, again, hunching over. Aim to spend more time with your head up high, as straight as possible. That will be of much help to you as well. And as always, reconnect with us. Once you begin to feel this freeness in your bodies, you will find it easier to connect with us as well. Easier to send your roots down into us, into the earth. Feel our support, our stability, and our strength that we happily share with you at any moment. We thank you so much for joining us. Namaste, beloveds. I hope you enjoyed that. It was a little bit of a continuation from what I was sharing. And I have been so focused on that, I'm not surprised that Gaia is supporting me in that and collaborating in many ways. There really is no separation among all these things. There are so many connections, and it's fun to find more and more of them every day. I hope you all do well. I encourage you to go back and watch, especially last week's video in addition to this one, because it will be talking about Groundhog Day, aka Imbolc, and St. Bridget's Day. See you next week.